U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, are testifying publicly for the first time before Congress. Let's listen in.
The questions that we have asked and that we're going to ask, and so I object to the continuation of that in this hearing today. While I'm at it, I would also point out, General Milley, I appreciate your statement, and I've read it, and I understand what you're trying to say. But further than what you mentioned, the allegation is that you told combatant commanders to report back to you. Our clear understanding is that they are not in the chain of command. You are not in their chain of command, that they report directly to the commander-in-chief through the secretary. And so to the extent that you told them to report to you, they were not in your chain of command. Now, let me see if I can get one question in here, having taken 2 minutes to mention a very important objection. General Milley, in the fall of 2020, you said an accelerated withdrawal would risk substantial gains and damage U.S. credibility. Now, I want to ask our witnesses about U.S. credibility. On July 8, President Biden said the likelihood there's going to be Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely. We now know he was advised, actually, this might happen. Turns out it was completely untrue, that statement on July 8th. Later in July, the President of the United States, President Biden, says, I trust the capacity of the Afghan military, better trained, better equipped, and more competent in terms of conducting the war. President Biden was wrong on that. We told our interpreters, our drivers, our friends, the people who had our backs during this entire period of time, that we would not abandon them, and that's exactly what we did. And in an interview, it's already been referred to on network news, President Biden says, and I quote, if there's American citizens left, we're going to stay and get them all out. 2 days later, the President of the United States unequivocally said, any American who wants to come home, we'll get you home. We're going to stay and get them out. The President of the United States, our Commander-in-Chief, did exactly the opposite. Now, I think you were right, General Milley, when you advised that our credibility would be damaged. Our credibility has been gravely damaged, has it not, General Milley?
I think that our credibility with allies and partners around the world and with adversaries is being intensely reviewed by them to see which way this is going to go. And I think that damage is one word that could be used, yes.
Yes, and Secretary Austin, there's no question that this sends a disastrous message to China and Russia. What message does it send to our NATO allies and our other allies around the world about not only our credibility, but our national resolve?
Thanks, Senator. What the world witnessed is the United States military evacuating 124,000 people out of a contested environment in 17 days.
Well, you testified that was a great accomplishment, our withdrawal and our evacuation. What about our credibility?
As I engage my counterparts, I think our credibility remains solid. Clearly, Senator, there will be people who question things going forward, but I would say that the United States military is one that, and the United States of America, people place great trust and confidence in. And relationships are things that we have to work on continuously, and we understand that, and we'll continue to do that.
Thank you, Senator Wicker. Senator Gillibrand, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm also very grateful to our service members who committed so much over the last 20 years. And I do want to thank President Biden for taking the tough yet necessary step to stop and end an endless war, something that many of us have pushed for over the last decade. There's obviously still a lot to do, both overseas and here at home, such as ensuring that Afghan refugees are treated respectfully and responsibly, both on the DoD basis, such as ensuring that they can be transitioned into their new lives in the United States. We also have the responsibility to our troops and to all Americans to make sure that we have a complete picture of what we did, accomplished, and happened over the last 20 years across all the administrations. We have to look back so that we can do better when we look forward. One way to do better is to make sure Congress maintains and fulfills its constitutional responsibility. We have to put back into the hands of Congress the right and responsibility to declare war. What started as a mission to defeat al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and the perceived threat in Iraq expanded to 20 years of war in multiple countries with hundreds of thousands of lives lost and trillions of dollars spent. This is why I introduced the War Powers Reform Resolution so that Congress can take back this responsibility for the benefit of our service members. Congress must set clear and defined goals for the use of military force abroad and place a limit to how long, where, and against whom we can continue military action without a new authorization in order to finally put a stop to endless wars and prevent them in the future. Second, there should be a comprehensive, rigorous, and objective audit on the war in its entirety. Over the last 20 years, the United States spent more than $2 trillion on the war in Afghanistan, and we lost thousands of American lives and tens of thousands of Afghan civilians. I commend the Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction for its independent and objective oversight of the Afghanistan reconstruction. But I do have questions beyond that. First, General Milley, in your testimony, you said and you mentioned that there are many lessons to be learned. What did you mean by that statement?
I think, Senator, thank you. I think there's a series of strategic lessons to be learned, and I would echo some of the ones that Senator Reid mentioned early on. Specific military lessons we have to take a hard look at. The United States military was tasked under the 2002 Bonn Agreement to train, man, and equip the Afghan army. The Germans were required to train, man, and equip the Afghan police. As we built that army and all of its components, I think that one error we may have made over time is we made them too dependent on technology, too dependent on our capabilities. We didn't take in the cultural aspects perhaps as much as we should have, and we mirror imaged, to put it simply. I think that's a big lesson. We're going to have to take a hard look at it, and the result is when you pull contractors, you pull troops. That, I think, is one of many contributing factors to the rapid collapse. So that's a big lesson. Another one is the intel lesson that we talked about. I think that's in the military realm as well as the intelligence community realm. There's a lot of other lessons: legitimacy of the government, corruption of the government. Those sorts of things are all out there as to why that government collapsed as rapidly as it could. But those are for others to sort out. There's a specific set of military lessons we need to pull out within the military.
I've also read, various opinion pieces. I know everyone here is deeply disturbed that the trained Afghan military did not perform as expected. I'd like your thoughts on, if they had performed as expected, would we have seen a prolonged civil war? What is your estimate of what the impact of them actually fighting would have been?
My estimate is if they had, performed as we expected them to perform, that the government would still be there. They would have probably lost significant chunks of territory, but Kabul would be there in some of the major provincial capitals. But I'd defer that. Probably you get a more granular view from that from General McKenzie.
General McKenzie?
I think had the Afghan military fought, we would have probably seen the Kabul Bowl, the approaches to Kabul, get into the winter, still under the control of the government of Afghanistan. A lot of the outlying provinces would not have been. But I would just note that it wasn't so much the collapse of the Afghan military as the collapse of the Afghan government writ large. Those two things happened together, and they were completely linked together. So when you consider one, I think you have to think about the other.
Additionally, in retrospect, one of the areas of debate has been whether we should have started our evacuation earlier. And I recognize that the Kabul government asked us not to start our evacuation early. Can you speak to what you now know and whether it would have been smarter or more effective if we had started evacuating personnel a year in advance or 6 months in advance or any time in advance?
Could I ask the Senator?
I apologize. I didn't realize my time was expired.
Thank you.
I'll submit that for the record.
Thank you very much, Senator Gillibrand. Senator Fisher, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, would like to thank our military men and women for their dedication to this country, for the sacrifices that they and their families make in any theater of war and make every day for us. But our exit from Afghanistan was a disaster, and the missteps that are already outlined had consequences that struck close to home. As a Nebraskan, Corporal Dagan Page was one of the 13 service members killed in action. And we should not forget, we have the policy discussions here today, but let us remember the human sacrifice. We also left American citizens behind. General Milley, in your written testimony, you stated withdrawal would increase risks of regional instability, the security of Pakistan and its nuclear arsenals, a global rise in violent extremist organizations, our global credibility with allies and partners would suffer, and a narrative of abandoning the Afghans would become widespread. Would you agree that all of these things have happened over the last 8 weeks or are currently happening?
I think in the main, yes, Senator. Most of those are probably happening right now.
And I hope that we see in the future military advice having more consideration by the administration on what will happen from what you and General McKenzie have said today.
If I may, Senator, I can tell you with 100% certainty that the military voice was heard and it was considered.
It was considered but not followed, correct?
We have presidents are elected for reasons. They make strategic decisions. And
I would
no
say this committee, General, has always stressed that commanders on the ground should be listened to. Would you agree with that?
I would, and I would tell you they were listened to. I think there's a difference between us having an opportunity to have a voice, and I think it's very important that the military has a voice. But I firmly believe in swinging control of the military, and I am required, and the military commanders are required to give our best military advice. But the decision makers are not required in any manner, shape, or form to follow that advice.
No, they are not. And I agree with you about the civilian control of this country. But I think it is also important to realize when we continue to see missteps by an administration that's costing lives. Secretary Austin, it's being reported right now that the Biden administration reached out to Russia about using Russian bases in the Central Asian nations bordering Afghanistan to the north for our strike assets to fly out of for the over-the-horizon counterterrorism missions. Is that true?
Senator, this is an issue that I believe came up during a conversation that the president had with President Putin, where President Putin offered to provide assistance.
But have you reached out to the Russians asking specifically to use bases?
General Milley just recently had a conversation with his Russian counterpart.
So the reports are true that have been coming out today?
I can assure you that we are not seeking Russia's permission to do anything. But I believe, and General Milley can speak for himself, but I believe that he asked for clarification on what that offer was.
I have a number of questions, which I'll need to get to with General McKenzie about over the horizon and the capabilities as we look to the future and what's available there. But I think it's what we're seeing in the reports today about asking to use Russian bases. That's just another example that we see of the Biden administration. They've really left us in a terrible position that we have to ask the Russians to be able to protect the United States from terrorists, and we have to ask them to use their installations. Thank you.
And I would just reemphasize, Senator, that we're not asking the Russians for anything.
But you're negotiating, trying to get these bases to be able to use their installations, because Afghanistan is a landlocked country, and when we have explanations from the military, and they give examples for over the horizon and use countries like Yemen and Libya and Somalia, that does not take into consideration that Afghanistan is landlocked, and we have to depend on Pakistan to give us airspace to get there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Senator Blumenthal, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I want to express my hope that this hearing is just the beginning, a first step in an in-depth analysis, going not just to the last 10 weeks or even 10 months, but 10 years and longer back, so that we can match the courage of the men and women of America who have sacrificed during this 20-year war, all of them and all of their families, not just in Afghanistan, but around the world. And we owe them, veterans of America, much more than we're giving them right now, because they have earned it. That in-depth analysis, looking backward, is essential, but I want to look forward right now to what is happening in Afghanistan with respect to Americans and our Afghan allies. After our withdrawal, it was left to an unofficial network or coalition of veterans, NGOs, some government officials. I was involved in an effort through chartered planes and airports outside of Kabul to try to airlift on a makeshift ad hoc basis Americans and Afghan allies still there. They have targets on their back. Their situation is increasingly urgent and desperate. And I have been frustrated by the lack of someone in charge and lines of authority, a point person. We need an evacuation czar, somebody who will provide a plan and supervise action so that we can get out of Afghanistan, the Americans that remain there. And I will tell you, we don't have an estimate on the number because nobody is in charge right now. So let me ask you, Secretary Austin, who at the Department of Defense has overall responsibility with overseeing the effort to evacuate?
As you know, well, first of all, Senator, thank you to you and your colleagues for all that you've done to continue to help get American citizens out of Afghanistan. The State Department, following the departure of the military, the State Department remained engaged and continued to work to get American citizens out. And as we've seen, some 85 American citizens and 79 legal permanent residents have departed via the Kabul airport. And so that work continues on. The State Department set up a cell to continue this work and develop a mechanism. That cell is headed up by Ambassador Bass. As you may recall, Ambassador Bass was one of the senior counselors on the ground at HKIA as we were conducting the investigation. I have a general officer that is a part of that cell, and we have reached out to, or Ambassador Bass has reached out to veterans groups and others who may have information that can help us continue to contact and eventually evacuate American citizens and LPRs. So this work continues, and we remain committed to continuing that work until we get out as many American citizens that are willing to come out.
Well, there was a point, and you can call it the eye of the storm, when the Taliban had taken over the country but really wasn't in charge, when we could have evacuated a great many more Americans and our Afghan allies, the translators and others, guards, security officers. And I feel that the administration was on notice. In fact, a group of us went to the White House in the spring and urged that there be a plan for evacuation. And unfortunately, the withdrawal prevented there from being anybody on the ground. And in the wake of that withdrawal, there was a vacuum of leadership. And I would hope that there would be more effective action now to put somebody in charge and develop a plan, because we know that there are many Americans, whether it's green card holders or citizens or others, still there. In Connecticut, we have a resettlement organization called IRIS. Chris George, who heads it, has told us of individuals who are still there, more than 40 in Kabul. I'm sure other organizations similarly know of such Americans who are still there.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Cotton, please.
Thank you. General Milley, it's your testimony that you recommended 2,500 troops approximately stay in Afghanistan?
As I've said many times before this committee and other committees, I don't share my personal recommendations to the president, but I can tell you my personal opinion and my assessment if that's what you want.
Yes, please.
Yes, my assessment was back in the fall of 20, and it remained consistent throughout, that we should keep a steady state of 2,500, and it could bounce up to 3,500, maybe something like that, in order to move toward a negotiated, gated solution.
Did you ever present that assessment personally to President Biden?
I don't discuss exactly what my conversations are with the sitting president in the Oval Office, but I can tell you what my personal opinion was, and I'm always candid.
General McKenzie, do you share that assessment?
Senator, I do share that assessment.
Did you ever present that opinion personally to President Biden?
Again, I'm not going to be able to comment on those executive discussions.
Did General Miller ever present that opinion personally to President Biden?
I think it would be best to ask him. I believe that his opinion was well heard.
Secretary Austin, President Biden last month in an interview with George Stephanopoulos said that no military leader advised him to leave a small troop presence in Afghanistan. Is that true?
Senator Cotton, I believe that, well, first of all, I know the president to be an honest and forthright man. And secondly,
it's a simple question, Secretary Austin. He said no senior military leader advised him to leave a small troop presence behind. Is that true or not? Did these officer and General Miller's recommendations get to the president personally?
Their input was received by the president and considered by the president, for sure. In terms of what they specifically recommended, Senator, as they just said, they're not going to provide what they recommended in confidence.
I mean, it sounds to me, it's shocking to me. It sounds to me like maybe their best military advice was never presented personally to the President of the United States about such a highly consequential matter. Let me move on to another recommendation they are reported to have made. General Milley, Joe Biden has said that it was the unanimous recommendation of the Joint Chiefs that we not maintain a military presence beyond August 31st. We've heard testimony to that effect today as well. When was that unanimous recommendation sought and presented to the president?
You're talking about the 31 August?
Yes, the 31 August deadline for getting out
on
of here.
25 August, I was asked to make an assessment and provide best military advice on...
I'm sorry, my time is limited here. Okay. You gave me the answer that I needed to hear. August 25th?
That's correct.
Kabul fell on August 15th.
That's correct.
You were not asked before August 25th? 16th.
On August 25th, I was asked to provide best military assessment as whether we should keep military forces past the 31st.
Secretary Austin, was anybody asked before August 25th if we should keep troops at the Kabul airport?
This is the president tasked us to provide an assessment on whether or not we should extend our presence beyond August 31st. And as General Milley just said, that assessment was made. We tasked him to make that assessment on the 25th, and he came back and provided.
There we go. Some tough questions leveled at the top military leaders in the U.S. as they testify on the hasty withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan for the first time since the troop withdrawal took place. Some of the things that stand out for us. The U.S. says that it absolutely missed, and I'm quoting, absolutely missed the swift collapse of the Afghan government and military, and that is what the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, has said, that the United States absolutely absolutely miss the swift collapse of the Afghan government and military. Remember, the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, and General Mark Milley are currently testifying publicly for the first time before Congress since the full U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Optimistic assessment, because even as late as July, you're still encouraging the Afghan Special Forces. You're expecting the Afghani government to remain, but that was not the case. In December of 2019, the Washington Post reported that the U.S. military commanders privately expressed a lack of confidence that the Afghan army and police could ever fend off, much less defeat the Taliban on their own. So, General Milley, you noted that there were some specific military lessons to be learned. This is not the first time that I think we have relied upon overly optimistic assessments of conditions on the ground or conflict conditions. It certainly happened in Vietnam. So my question to you is, what specific steps can we take to make sure that our assessments are not overly optimistic so we can avoid the kind of reliance on assessments that are not accurate?
I think in the case of working with other countries' armies, it's important to have advisors with those units so you can do a holistic assessment of things that are very difficult to measure, the morale factors, leadership, will. I think that's one key aspect. Another part, I think it's really important, and this is a lesson from Vietnam and I think today, is don't Americanize the war. We learned that in El Salvador or in Colombia, for example, where we did assist and help other countries' armies fight insurgencies, and we were quite effective, but it was their country, their army, that bore the burden of all the fighting, and we had very, very few advisors, and it was quite effective. Now, every country is different, every war is different, it has to be evaluated on its own merits, but I think those are some key points that are worth thinking about.
I agree. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rona. Senator Rounds, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, first of all, thank you for your willingness to appear before this committee to answer questions on the withdrawal from Afghanistan. You've received and will continue to receive tough questions on what led to this decision. This is an important constitutional requirement of the jobs that you have agreed to serve in, and I thank you all for your many years of service to our nation. I want to underline the fact that every single member of this committee, regardless of party, is grateful for the dedication and bravery exhibited by our service members, especially those who gave their last full measure of devotion at Abbey Gate. General McKenzie, General Miller told this committee that he recommended keeping 2,500 troops in Afghanistan, and this is back in January of 2021. Because he felt that Afghan forces would not hold out long without our support. It seems to me that there would have been a process to convey General Miller's recommendation to the President. Can you share the process and who conveyed General Miller's recommendation? And was that recommendation delivered to both President Trump at the time and also to President Biden?
So there is a process for delivering recommendations from commanders in the field. I was part of that process. While I've been very clear that I won't give you my recommendation, I've given you my view, which I think you can draw your own conclusions from. And my view is that 2,500 was an appropriate number to remain, and that if we went below that number, in fact, we would probably witness a collapse of the Afghan government and the Afghan military. So,
General McKenzie, I guess my question is, would it be fair for the committee to assume that both President Trump and President Biden received that specific information that had been assumed to be delivered by General Miller?
I believe it would be reasonable for the committee to assume that.
And would General Miller have been able to deliver that directly to the President, or would someone else have had to have delivered that for him?
I would leave it to General Miller to express an opinion on that, but he and I both had the opportunity to be in executive session with the President, and I can't share anything beyond making that statement.
Thank you. Secretary Austin, this committee was briefed on the series of rock drills, a rehearsal of concept drills, that examine the many potential scenarios that could arise through the execution of different types of actions and counteractions. We've been briefed by multiple leaders that the worst-case scenario, an unforecasted collapse of the Afghan government, was not something that these drills factored in as a possibility. Is it true that we actually did tabletop exercises and we actually went through these drills and we never assumed that there could be an immediate collapse of the Afghan government?
We planned for a range of possibilities. The entire collapse of the Afghan government was clearly one of the things that, if you look at the intel estimates and some of the estimates that others had made, that could happen. But in terms of specific planning, especially with respect to NEO, we planned for a contested environment or an uncontested environment. The requirement to evacuate a moderate amount of people versus a large amount of people. So there was a range of possibilities that we addressed.
But never with an immediate collapse of the government.
We certainly did not plan against a collapse of a government in 11 days.
Thank you. General Milley, I think Senator Cotton made a very good point with regard to the timing, the collapse of Kabul, and the time in which you were asked for your professional military opinion about the path forward. What seems to be the real challenge for many of us is that it appears that in your professional military opinion, it would have been prudent to have used a different approach than a date certain with regard to a withdrawal from Afghanistan. And if that is correct, and if there were other alternatives presented to the president, I'm certain that the frustration that you felt in not having your professional military advice followed closely by an incoming president, that you were then tasked in a very short period of time with handling what was a position in time for the people that were on the ground there to respond in an emergency basis. Would it be fair to say that you changed from a long-term plan of gradual withdrawal based on conditions to one in which you had to make immediate changes based upon a date certain?
Senator, as a matter of professional advice, I would advise any leader, don't put date certains on end dates. Make things conditions-based. Two presidents in a row put dates on it. I don't think that's my advice is don't put specific dates. Make things conditions-based. That is how I've been trained over many, many years. With respect, though, to the 31st and the decision on the 25th, the risk to mission and the risk to force, and most importantly, the risk to the American citizens that are remaining, that was going to go up, not down, on the 1st of September. And the American citizens, I know there's American citizens there, but they would have been at greater risk had we stayed past the 31st, in our professional opinion.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kane, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the witnesses, I want to return to a point that Senator Wicker made. I informed a DOD witness about 10 days ago that we would expect an answer to the question of how many Americans are still in Afghanistan, and that we would not appreciate an answer that was deferred to state. I'm going to ask the question during my second round of questions after lunch, and with the number of staff who are here in this room and in the anteroom, we ought to be able to get an answer. And if we can't, it will suggest to the committee, and I don't think you want to suggest this to the committee, that you don't want to be responsive to that question, or that you don't talk to the State Department, or that the number of Americans in Afghanistan is something that you're indifferent to. I don't think any of those are true, so I'll ask the question again after lunch, and I hope we can get an answer. Two compliments and then a critical observation and inquiry. First, thanks to President Biden for ending the U.S. combat mission in Afghanistan after 20 years. It took guts, and it was the right thing to do, and it should have been done earlier. A Virginia service member whose wife is expecting said this to me recently: "I'm so glad that my baby is not being born into a country at war." Some want us to stay on permanent war footing in Afghanistan and elsewhere. Some will point out that U.S. troops are still deployed, still in harm's way, still carrying out limited military strikes around the world. But to the families of those who have been deployed over and over again into Iraq and Afghanistan over the course of the last 20 years, they are relieved that America is now turning the page and rejecting the notion that we should be a nation in permanent war. Second, the effort to evacuate more than 120,000 people to safety under chaotic circumstances was remarkable. I visited the Dulles Expo Center, the principal arrival point for about 80% of the Afghans. I also visited Fort Lee, the first of the 8 forts that process Afghans. And I visited with Afghans, our troops, the many federal agencies working together, NGOs. The competent and compassionate service on the American side and the deep gratitude among Afghans made a deep impression on me. We should do all we can to make that transition to a safe life in America as productive as possible. My chief criticism and question is this: why did the Afghan security force and civilian government collapse so quickly, and why did the U.S. so overestimate their capacity? The second half of the question, why we overestimated their capacity, is very important. To any who have said we couldn't see this coming, the members of this committee know that's wrong. An immediate collapse may not have been the most likely outcome, but we have heard for years, particularly from the intel community, that DoD estimates of Afghan strength were way too optimistic. I believe the U.S. government had a good evacuation plan, but it was premised on an Afghan civilian and military government that showed high resistance to the Taliban. And so we did not adequately plan for the real possibility of a quick collapse. We need to explore both military and interagency decision-making processes to understand why we were unrealistic and how to correct that going forward. But the most important part of the question is why a military we had trained for 20 years at a cost of $800+ billion collapsed so quickly. I can think of 3 reasons, but after I put them on the table, I would like each of you, beginning with General McKenzie, to address the question, and if we can't, we can do it when we come back after lunch. First, the lightning collapse may show that our training was insufficient and that it did not prepare the Afghan military to defend the country on their own. That should have been our goal, but we failed to accomplish it. If so, how must we change our thinking about training foreign militaries? Second, the lightning collapse may not prove that the ANSF were poor fighters, but that they were demoralized. Did they lack confidence in their own political and military leaders? Were they demoralized by a 2020 peace agreement between the U.S. and the Taliban that didn't even include the Afghan government? Mr. Chair, I'd like to introduce the peace agreement for the record.
Without objection.
Did U.S. and allied funding deepen a culture of corruption that long predated our involvement? Even the best fighting force may give in if they have no confidence in their leadership. Third, the lightning collapse may show that we wanted things for Afghans that Afghan leadership did not want for themselves. We celebrated gains in public health and women's education, and we assumed that Afghans would fight to preserve those gains rather than allow the Taliban to take over. In other words, we thought we knew what Afghans wanted, what they feared, and what they would fight for. But was our belief, though well-intentioned, incredibly naive? We can't get 1/3 of Americans to take a COVID vaccine or accept the results of a presidential election. Do we really think we can transform the culture of another nation? So to each of our witnesses, when we return in the second round, I will ask you this question. Why do you believe the Afghan military and civilian government collapsed so quickly? With that, I'll yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Kane. Senator Ernst, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And gentlemen, thank you very much for being here today. And unfortunately, this morning's hearing is required due to the haphazard withdrawal of U.S. forces, American citizens, and many of our Afghan partners. However, we do want to thank the men and women in uniform that assisted the evacuation of those that were able to make it out, and of course, to those that have given their service and sacrifice over the past 2 decades of the global war on terror. The loss of our service members and abandonment of Americans and Afghan allies last month was an unforced, disgraceful humiliation that didn't have to happen. The president put a cheap political victory, a withdrawal timeline timed to the 20th anniversary of 9/11 on his calendar and executed his vision with little regard for American lives or the real threats that we face. I do appreciate your open, your honest, and expert participation in communicating to this committee what went wrong. I think our American citizens are at a real crossroads right now where they are questioning the leadership from this president and this administration. President Biden's blunders can't be erased, but the United States must now account for them through a revamped counterterrorism strategy that recognizes the newfound momentum of terrorists and new threats emanating from the Middle East. in addition to rising challenges that we see coming from China and Russia. Pretty high stakes. Secretary Austin, I'd like to start with you. Did President Biden or any of his national security advisors express any military or diplomatic conditions for the American withdrawal from Afghanistan beyond the looming date of 9/11? What were those military conditions or diplomatic conditions that were outlined to you?
Again, once the president went through a very deliberate decision-making process and made his decision that to exit Afghanistan, there were no additional conditions placed on it.
Can you tell me that he did take into consideration military or diplomatic conditions, and what were those conditions that he was weighing as he was making those decisions?
Sure. One of the things that all of us wanted to see happen was for this conflict to end with a diplomatic solution, and so one of the things that we certainly wanted to see was progress being made in the Doha negotiations, and we did not see, or he did not see, any progress being made, and there was really not much of a bright future for that process.
So General Milley had stated earlier that his recommendation is always, as any military commander should do, should be conditions-based. And we have to be able to evaluate whether those conditions are achievable and if we can successfully complete those. It sounds like there were very little consideration given to diplomatic or military conditions. The diplomatic, again, going to conditions-based, the diplomatic end to it, I think, General Milley, you also said that the military mission would end on the 31st and transition to a diplomatic mission. But I don't understand how we fulfill a diplomatic mission after August 31st when there are absolutely no diplomats on the ground in Afghanistan. They're gone. They've been evacuated. Who do we hand that mission off to when there is nobody there to complete it? So can you then say that the president directed you, Secretary Austin, to execute an unconditional withdrawal from Afghanistan? Unconditional. August 31st, done.
Once he made the decision to withdraw, I mean, that was the decision to leave, and we certainly wanted to make sure that we shaped conditions so that our embassy could maintain a presence there and continue to engage the government of Afghanistan. So
Secretary
protection
Austin.
of the embassy was pretty important.
Yes, Secretary Austin, you are extremely diplomatic in your answers. I can appreciate that. But this was not a conditions-based withdrawal. And I think all three of you have stated that you made your best opinion known to the President of the United States. He had no conditions other than to get our people out of Afghanistan, which he failed at because we still have Americans as well as Afghan partners in Afghanistan. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Ernst. Senator King, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm finding this a very interesting hearing. It's really two hearings at once. One is on the question of should we leave Afghanistan, and if we shouldn't, what should be the nature of our troop commitment and our commitment to the country. The other is the withdrawal, which I thought was the subject of the hearing. The decision to leave Afghanistan was made by President Trump and his administration on February 29th, 2020, where we committed to leave by a date certain. There was a particular provision or a condition, if you will, about negotiations between the Taliban and the Afghan government. There was even a date specified, March 10th, 2020, less than 2 weeks after the signing of the Doha Agreement. Clearly, that condition was not met. My question is, and General Milley, you were the only one who overlapped the two administrations, were there any efforts on behalf of the prior administration to enforce that condition of negotiation with the Afghan government and the Taliban?
Senator, as I said in my opening remarks, the conditions that were required of the Taliban, none of them were met except one.
My question is, did we attempt to enforce those conditions? Did we inform the Taliban, for example, we won't advocate for the release of 5,000 prisoners unless you begin negotiations, or something similar?
I don't have personal knowledge of that, whether or not, Zal Khalilzad or others were personally saying that. I don't have personal knowledge of that, but I do know that none of the conditions were met except the one, which is don't attack American forces and coalition forces. That condition was.
The conditions were not met, but you testified that the troop withdrawals and the release of the 5,000 Taliban prisoners did proceed, even though the conditions had not been met. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you've testified you provide your best military advice to President Biden that there should be a residual force left in Afghanistan. Did you provide the same advice to President Trump when they were negotiating the Doha agreement? Again, I'm not going to discuss precise advice. Was it your best military judgment that a residual force?
At that time, yes, and that's what that a series of memos and advice and meetings, et cetera, in the September-October timeframe. That's exactly what they were, and you can talk to Secretary Esper. He could tell you the same thing.
So your military judgment didn't change on January 20th?
No.
Thank you. General McKenzie, you touched on something that you were the only one to mention it in this entire hearing. In my judgment, one of the key moments was the fleeing of President Ghani, and that is, in fact, what really pulled the rug out from under the military and demoralized the entire government. That was really not the beginning of the end of the end. Do you have some thoughts on that?
I think when we consider what happened to the Afghan military, you have to consider it completely linked to what happened to the Afghan government. And when your president flees literally on no notice in the middle of the day, that has a profoundly debilitating effect on everything else. Now, events were pretty far along on 15 August, so I would note that. But I do believe it is possible they could have fought and held parts of Kabul had the president stayed. I think that really demoralized those remnants of Afghans, and there were still considerable Afghan combat formations around Kabul on 15 August. I believe they were really disorganized by that and led to the Taliban really pushing in as fast as they wanted to go into the center of the city.
For all the viewers tuning into WION World is One right now, those were the top military leaders in the U.S. being grilled by lawmakers in Capitol Hill in the U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, testified publicly for the first time before Congress since the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. And General Milley said that the U.S. was not prepared for the kind of and the pace of the collapse of the Afghan government. That is what General Mark Milley said. WION World is One is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.